well, Santa Ana it's a fairly decent sized city. I mean, they didn't have any like skyscrapers or anything like that. It's just very large. And my first area was kind of just on the outskirts of the city. And most of my mission consisted of just a really big neighborhood built by the government. And it's really cheap housing for people, that live there, and it's really interesting because it's all built the same. Like, we would often get lost because just all of the buildings looked the same usually, and there were a few landmarkers that differentiated it, and so that was definitely interesting. And just the housing, on how everything looked the same, and you go into one house and it's exactly the same as the other one, and so that was definitely interesting, just to see just like the living conditions. At least in Santa Ana, parts of it was that, I guess you could say the lower middle class, maybe, to lower class, would live in these government housing, and it was fairly cheap for them, as far as I understand, and very small, very cramped living conditions. You would be teaching someone and quite possibly like be touching their knees, while you're sitting down on, their couches that they have in their small room. And so that was definitely interesting to see, like, how people lived that way. And as far as, my mission goes, it was different, or that area goes, it was different, because if you get into the center of the city is where more of the wealth is. And so you'd get to some really big houses. And when you got to those big houses, all of them had a really big wall around them. That was a really common thing, was just to see just a big wall with a big, slidable door that you can, put cars in and everything like that. And there was one part of my mission that was, complete opposite. That was very interesting. Across the street were those really big houses, because it was kind of on, the suburbs of the city. And I really enjoyed, going and seeing those houses, because I thought that they were, really cool and everything like that. They were really difficult to contact, because most of the time they had, really big jobs, either in San Salvador or Santa Ana. They had office jobs, kind of like white collar type of jobs. And you would often go up and they would have a intercom system. You'd push the buzzer, and they would often have a camera, and so they'd see who you are. They'd ask you who you are. You definitely say, we're the missionaries, and we would like to share a message. And so that was kind of difficult, because there wasn't that face-to-face interaction, because you had this big wall between, and so that was difficult. But I always had a lot of fun doing it, because you got to see these beautiful, well, at least these beautiful walls that had, the houses behind them. Every once in a while there'd be one that would be open, and so you'd be able to see in it. And even though those people, generally they might have not been as interested, when just as far as, cold contacting goes, they were just very kind. They would always just say, oh no, thank you, we don't really have time, or they were always very kind. And that was one thing that really stood out to me in El Salvador, is just a very kind culture. And they would always they wouldn't want to be confrontational with you, which was definitely interesting to see. So that was, like, as far as the living conditions go, in El Salvador, well, at least in Santa Ana, which was the city. The transportation is, I would say, 95% bus. Everyone got around using the bus system. So there were buses everywhere. That's what the missionaries used. We had buses, so no like bikes or anything. We would, and they were fairly cheap. A quarter gives you a ride within the city, or from the mission office to where our area was. So fairly cheap. Sometimes maybe it might get to like 50 cents if it was farther than that. So that was something that definitely was interesting. Was cheap bus fares. And since everyone used the buses, you definitely see every different type of people on the bus. And I really liked being on the buses, because you'd get to see and also contact people on the bus. We would often, as missionaries, sit separately so we could sit next to someone on the bus. No one can run away when they're on the bus, right? And so that was something that we did, and we just chat. Sometimes we would just chat with them, like get to know who they were, their life, like very interesting. A lot of times people would bring on, because the work there involves the people that use the buses. It involves a lot of selling things that they make or trade with. Sometimes people would make their own baskets or something like that and sell those. But I think the more common thing was they would get a hold of clothing or other items like that, and then they would sell them in the streets. Most of it was clothing. Sometimes it was food, a lot of fruit, stuff like that. So that's what that consisted of. They would just go and maybe sell in the street. Maybe they had a place where they'd rent out or something like that. That was interesting to see. And so they'd always bring their stuff on with them to go wherever. And so like these big ginormous bags, like this little old lady with like a really big bag that they would carry on their head. That was a common thing of the women of El Salvador. They would just carry immense loads of whatever on their heads. And it was surprising for us as missionaries, and that they would be able to do that. And so that was definitely an interesting experience, just to see the people carrying that stuff. And so that's what it consisted of. They would go out and sell something, or actually it was pretty common to have a store in your actual home, where they would have anything from chips, just potato chips, to shampoo. And it was just like a little store that they would have whenever someone needed something really quick, they just go to the little corner store. They called them tienditas, which means little store, and you could just get anything. And they were everywhere, from block to block. That was something that was really cool, because every once in a while the missionaries are just, I want a snack, and so you just walk right up to that store, pay them 10 cents for a bag of chips. And that was something that was interesting there. And so that probably is like the work life, I would say, of a lot of people in El Salvador. Well, at least in Santa Ana, which is kind of a bigger city. And that was the main thing, was just trade, selling things and stuff like that. And I was amazed. A lot of people do sell things on the bus. They would bring whatever thing that they could with them, and they just kind of walk along and just offer to sell something, and then just hop off. If they sold something or not, they'd hop off and get onto the next bus. That was something that people exclusively did. Whether it was like candy, fruit, something like that would be very common. Some people, I remember once someone was selling one of those spirographs, where you draw and you can make cool pictures. And so just any sort of knick-knack or whatever you can think of, especially when the buses would drive through the actual market. And they had a big market set up where everyone would be selling everything, meats, fruits, things like that. And when they'd be driving through the market, which was usually by the bus terminal, so you'd be able to drive right through it. And they would always just, tons of people, 10, 20 people would just come on and just start shouting, what they were selling. And so it got really loud, and just shouting what they were selling. Sometimes you had to look and see what you wanted. Maybe sometimes, and they would, you just make that transaction and be on your way. And so that was definitely interesting to see, just like people selling all these things. And sometimes you didn't even need to get off the bus to go to the market, because it would come to you. And so that was definitely fun to see. And just like in that part, excuse me, in that part of the city. So